So, the translations are out for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 369, and in this video, I'm going to be discussing a few things that I may have missed in the chapter, and talk a little bit more about what's going to be going on with the second user's quirk, as well as what's going to be happening with Spinner in the upcoming chapters. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Monkman Drew, and I'm here to do my discussion for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 369, and for what we give the name of the official translations, it's titled A Chain of Events Across the Ages. And in this video, I just want to go, as I said, over a little bit more about what we learned about the second user's quirk in this chapter, as well as talk about some things that I missed, and talk about what's going to be going on with Spinner, and sort of my theory for what the next few chapters are going to entail. So for starters, let's go over the small differences between the official and unofficial translations. And relatively speaking, there were not that many differences between the translations. One difference in translations comes from how the quirk of the second user, which is confirmed to actually be gear shift, and how in the unofficial translation, it talks about how it's able to defy or warp the laws of physics, while in the official translation, it's said to warp the very laws that govern reality. So it's not a real big difference there, but just a slight one at the least. And another difference between the official and unofficial translations just comes from a clarification after Deku delivers a major quintuple smash upon Shigaraki, and how in the unofficial translation, it talks about this idea that the attack that just landed was more powerful and faster, while in the official translation, it's actually stated to be weaker, which makes sense with the context of this chapter about the reasoning why it's weaker is because it doesn't have Fajin, but the attack itself stored up enough Fajin for a later attack we see at the end of this chapter. And that's pretty much all of the changes between the official and unofficial translations, and now I'm going to go over some things that I missed that I may not have addressed fully in the actual chapter review. For starters, the one thing that I just didn't really talk about is the fact that All For One can actually see the vestiges inside of One For All without having to actually be inside the vestige world. And this is something interesting because this is something that we have really no precedence for. We've never seen a character be able to interact or even see the vestiges outside of the user of that quirk, in the case of One For All, Deku and All Might, or they've never been able to see it unless they're in the vestige world inside of that quirk. And pretty much this chapter explained that the reasoning why this is all happening is because One For All and All For One are sort of resonating with one another. And in a way, they are on the same wavelength. Because we know that Deku is able to see the vestiges that are inside of him, and One For All is responsible for it, but because of the connection between One For All and All For One can now see the vestiges inside of One For All, and is they're able to see the second user, which is why he has this confusion about seeing him as well as the other vestiges, as well as being able to sort of, in a way, be connected again with his brother and being able to see him. And in actuality, this is something that we've actually seen prior during Joint Training Arc, where the first user of One For All was able to sort of sense his own brother, and vice versa. All For One was able to sense his younger brother inside of One For All, even though they were miles apart. So it shows that this is something that we've actually seen before, and we're diving a little bit more into it, and that this is probably going to be playing a bigger role in this fight moving forward. And now let's talk about the smaller things that I really missed, which weren't big bombastic moments, but are still things that I would like to point out. Because one small thing that I really didn't notice fully in the actual chapter is that in the 4 panels where we see that Mirio is helping Nejire, where we see that Edshot is still inside of Bakugo, we get to see that Tamaki was most likely saved by Mirko, as we see that she's standing up leaning against the wall instead of, being unconscious. So most likely she was the one that actually helped Tamaki get to more of a safe place. And a second thing, and this is a very minor one, but I just find it enjoyable, is that when Deku is describing everything that is happening and what's going through his mind and what's going through his actions of delivering that massive attack at the end or towards the end of this chapter, he is saying it out loud and is describing everything that he did, going from one quirk to another quirk to another quirk and another quirk, and he's muttering it to himself, which is just something that is very amazing because it's just within Deku's character to do so. But it's also, in a way, exposition for us, the readers, to understand what Deku was doing in this moment. And I find it funny that Horikoshi was able to give this exposition through a characterization of Deku when it comes to his muttering. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I really missed in this chapter. So let's dive in a little bit more about the second user's quirk. So for starters, like I said, it was confirmation that the second user's quirk is actually called Gear Shift. And we actually learn a little bit more about this quirk in this chapter. For starters, a main new thing that we learned about his quirk is that it can literally affect inertia, which pretty much means that he's able to affect an object's ability to continue to move due to the forces that are acting upon it. And this is very important and very impactful because it means that if inertia isn't a factor when it comes to gear shift, that means that Deku can realistically move at any speed, in any direction, and at any moment stop and have no ill effects placed upon his body by the forces acting upon him via inertia. Which means at this moment, he really can't hurt himself that much by going too fast. And this is great, but this does not mean that Deku still isn't being affected by the quirk and the power of the quirk itself. And it's also explained that the reasoning why this quirk is able to do this is because that One For All was able to give it this power boost that allows it to not only affect one singular cell or one small object, but all of the cells in Deku's body to be able to do this. And that this is something that is just so impossible, or at the very least something that no one could have predicted, that even All For One himself did not know that this is something that One For All can do. Which is interesting to think that there may be another reasoning why All For One wants One For All, and maybe not necessarily for the fact that it's able to boost the power of other quirks, because it is implied that he didn't know that One For All could do this. Which ties into an idea that I have, is that the reasoning why he wants One For All so much is just because it has his brother's quirk, or has his brother's essence inside of it, and he just wants to have his brother back. Because even though All For One is a horrible person, he still has this twisted love for his brother. And that's probably where I think the reasoning why he wants One For All is not because of the power, but because of his brother inside of the power. So yeah, this quirk can literally break and alter and shift reality to a major extent. And we also get to see that this is done by, once again, Deku shifting gears, but going into a new gear called Low Gear. So yeah, that's pretty much all of the new stuff that we have with the quirk, and just the fact that it can now pretty much be unaffected or warping the reality because of how powerful it is by One For All. So now let's really talk about the ending of this chapter and what the ending could entail. Because as All For One goes through his monologue about how he hasn't really been able to show off his power, to show off this new body in a really reasonable way, we cut over to Spinner. And that Spinner is most likely going to be playing a major role in All For One's plans to turn the tides of this war for the villain's favor and for All For One to potentially win. So, how is Spinner going to be playing this role, and what is he going to do that is going to cause All For One to gain an advantage? Well, I think it's very simple. I think that Spinner is going to free Kurogiri from Central Hospital, because that is where Spinner is. He's at, if not extremely near, Central Hospital, where Kurogiri is kept. And that he is going to free Kurogiri and potentially warp Shigaraki to where Kurogiri is, or, most likely than not, Aizawa. And I think that it's most likely that he's going to warp Aizawa to where Kurogiri is, either through the success of rescuing Kurogiri, or that he fails or is defeated, but as a last-ditch effort, Kurogiri warps Aizawa to Central Hospital. Either way, I think that is the plan that is in store because of a few pieces of information that we know. For starters, we do know for a fact that Monoma could still use Erasure for 5 minutes after Aizawa has left. Which means that either within that time that Aizawa is there and leaves, the heroes will have 5 minutes to try and defeat Shigaraki before Erasure will no longer be affecting him, and then he will have all of his quirks, which would be the villains gaining the upper hand and potentially having All For One have the edge that he needs to try and kill the heroes and take One For All for himself. And the reasoning why I want to bring this up is because that 5-minute interval is the exact same 5-minute interval given when we're talking about Gear Shift, and how the second user was telling Deku that, hey, if you do not defeat All For One within 5 minutes, we're doomed. So the fact that 5 minutes is an interval that affects 2 different characters in the same area is most likely bringing this idea into our heads that within 5 minutes, Erasure is no longer going to be active, Deku is going to be incapacitated, and Shigaraki, all for one, is going to go on a rampage with all of his quirks active. And that this is probably where a lot more characters are going to be in a lot more danger, including Deku himself, unless Bakugo is able to, you know, chime in and come to the rescue of Deku. So I think that Spinner is going to eventually free Kurogiri, but the reasoning why I think that he's going to lose his fight is because I do think that the heroes are going to need a win over the villains for this major part to happen. And I think that it's going to be a turning point for Spinner and his character, and that it's going to be done via the character of Shoji. Because we do know for a fact that through Horikoshi's mouth that Shoji is going to be playing a major role in this final arc, in this final war. And where is Shoji right now? Well, he's near Central Hospital, most likely about to fight Spinner. So I think that what's going to be happening is that we're going to actually get a few chapters of Spinner going up against Shoji, where Shoji's probably going to have some form of development or some form of growth that may affect Spinner in a more positive way, that may force him to question going after Kurogiri, but then just doubling down on it, even though he may know that it's wrong, because that's just the type of person that he is, and that he still kind of believes in Shigaraki and is just willing to commit to Shigaraki whether or not he believes that it's the right thing to do or not. So I think that we're going to be getting obviously a confrontation between Shoji and Spinner, and I think that Shoji is going to get a win on Spinner, but that via that win Kurogiri gets freed, and then what I said about Eraserhead and Aizawa being warped to Central Hospital will happen, and then Shigaraki, all for one, will regain his quirks within 5 minutes and go on a quirk rampage. So yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts on it, and I just really hope that this is where the direction that Horikoshi is going, because it's going to definitively add a lot more stakes to the fight once Shigaraki regains the ability to use all for one in a battle-like setting where we get to see potentially more interesting things about him. And that by time that happens, potentially the original All for One comes in and it becomes a major battle between the heroes All for One and Shigaraki. So yeah, that's pretty much all I really wanted to discuss in this chapter. So let me ask you, was there anything else that I missed? And what do you think of this sort of theory about what's going to be happening within the next few chapters involving Spinner? Leave your thoughts down in the comments down below, leave a like on the video if you liked it, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!